Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to STL History Live. I'm so glad that we were able to coax a lot of you to come in from this gorgeous evening and take part with our presentation. Tonight's program is Unbelievable St. Louis, the special April Fool's edition. I'm Tammy Goldman, Director of Tourism and Visitor Experience. But tonight, I'm your host, or really the behind the scenes technical assistance to ensure that this program runs smoothly. Um, as you know, due to our present situation that has been going on for a long time, most of our program, nearly all of our programming is virtual. However, the Missouri History Museum and Soldiers Memorial are open for visitors Wednesday through Sunday. Because your safety is our top priority, the capacity to the buildings are restricted, and we do require advance reservations. All tickets are timed entry and of course free, but you need to reserve those tickets in advance, preferably, or you could get those tickets reserved for you when you visit. If you want to do it in advance, which would make your life really easy, just go to our website and follow all the directions that you'll find there to make your tickets. So before we begin, I just want to do a special thank you to those in the audience that are members of the Missouri Historical Society. Without you, we couldn't do half, but really everything that we do is because of the support that you all provide for us. If you're not a member and would like to have more information through the program, I will put a link to our support pages on the Missouri History Museum website. And another special thanks also goes to the Zoo Museum Tax District. We sincerely thank you at the ZMD, as well as those of you in the audience from the St. Louis City and County for your tax contributions. So just a few more little housekeeping notes, and I promise I will let Amanda take the reins. So this program is going to run about 45 minutes and followed by a traditional question and answer session. We will get to as many of those questions as we can, but knowing Amanda as I do, she loves for interaction. So you don't have to wait till the end of the program to submit your questions. You can submit them throughout the program, but please do so at the Q&A, in the Q&A section, which you'll find on your toolbar. Also on your toolbar is closed captioning. It is available for today's presentation. If you'd like to utilize this function, just click the arrow next to the box marked CC, and then just hit where it says show subtitles, and that's all you need to do. Today's program is being recorded, so if you'd like to review it again or share it with your friends, it will be posted on our Missouri Historical Society YouTube channel in just a few days. And lastly, but most importantly, your feedback is very, very important to us. We would really appreciate it if you could answer just a few questions at the conclusion of the program. So what you'll find after Zoom is over, a Kobo Toolbox survey will pop up in another tab in your browser. So keep an eye out for that when you leave this session. Okay, so I know why you're really here. It's not to hear me. You want to learn what is so unbelievable about St. Louis. Well, so do I. Today's program is presented by Missouri Historical Society's own and my friend, Community Tours Manager and developer of the CSTL Tour Program, the one, the only, Amanda Clark. So Amanda, it's yours. Let's have this presentation.
Thank you, Tammy. I want all my presentations to start like that. Welcome, everybody. This is going to be a super fun, hopefully a super fun talk. Usually, when I'm doing these talks, it's a big topic and I'm moving through all kinds of things. And tonight I'm just going to have fun. And I've picked some of my very favorite stories that show up, on some of my tours, but also some things that have been shared with me recently that have made me say, like, what? And then the special thing is that buried in here is a topic that's totally not true. And yeah, you get to pick out which one you think it is. I will make sure to tell you which one it is at the end so that when it makes it onto YouTube, it doesn't go off into the historic record as a true story. As Tammy said, I am the manager of the Community Tours program, which is the CSTL Tours. And you can usually find me, if I'm not behind my computer talking like this, you can usually find me somewhere out in the streets walking around the great city of St. Louis and showing off architecture and telling good stories. And we are in high gear for tours, and I welcome all of you to come join us. We have so many new tours coming up, including a walking tour of the hill that's got our own special spin on it. And we have a tour of Tower Grove coming up, and then a brand new downtown tour that some of our new tour guides are writing that just is phenomenal. I didn't know anything. When they gave me the tour, I didn't know anything. It was fantastic. So invite you on all of our walking tours, and then later in the summer, some bus tours. We'll be riding around. All right, so like I said, tonight I'm going to be presenting just a couple of little topics. We don't have a lot of time to go into too many things, so I'm just going to keep it light, and it's going to move quickly. As Tammy said, I do not mind being asked a question as we move along, and I will try to check the chat and check the Q&A before I move to each topic. I would like to give a very huge thank you to my colleagues, Andrew Wonko and Adam Kloppy, in their assistance in finding some of these amazing stories. And I asked them for just a few ideas, and they just over-delivered. So thank them for their help tonight. And also a thank you to the person a long time ago who took this amazing photo. And if you've been to any of my virtual tours, this photo actually shows up on the St. Louis Underground tour, which is all about caves and sinkholes. But I find a reason to use it whenever I can because it's just so absurd. And I love the horse being pulled out of the hole in the middle of the day. I love the people watching, and I love the fact that there's only one guy who is working this pulley. So this sounds like, I'm sure this day, whenever this was reported to someone, like, hey, we got a horse in a hole we got to work on, that probably sounded very much like an April Fool's. And problems we don't have anymore. We don't have to pull horses out of holes anymore in city streets. We have other things to worry about. All right, our first completely unbelievable story is one that I have loved sharing on our downtown tour called Best of the Worst. And this is a tour that's all about all the things that have gone wrong in St. Louis history. And this has always been a favorite part of that. And so to set the backdrop for it, I have a few photographs in the MHS collections that are obviously circuses. Some of them are from the annual police circus in St. Louis, some from a circus that's being held on Grand Avenue, a few special performers from the Beckman Garrity Circus that was a pretty big hit in St. Louis. MHS has a great collection of the performers from the circus. Like we have portraits of them. They're really fascinating. And that was a nationally known traveling show in the early 20th century. So the first story is the amazing story of a very eventful train wreck in November of 1887. And while I would love to detail all of it myself, I find that, as usual, the New York Times did it best in 1887. And so I'm going to do a dramatic reading of the New York Times description of a train wreck that happened in St. Louis in 1887. Here it says Union Station, but that we know that they're talking about something that's not the same Union Station that we know of now. So just keep that in mind. So this wreck happened in St. Louis in 1887. Here we go. John Robinson's circus train was wrecked at the Union Station this evening, and a pair of lions, a tiger, a leopard, and a hyena succeeded in escaping from the cages. The excitement was intense for a few minutes, but the animals, being of the circus kind, were more scared than the people and were easily captured. The train had just arrived from Fort Scott, Kansas, where the last stand had been made, and its destination was Cincinnati, where the show has winter quarters. The train consisted of 20 flat cars carrying animal cages and circus paraphernalia, and 3 passenger coaches for actors and employees. A stop was made in the Missouri Pacific Yards, and when the signal to start was given, the train pulled out rapidly toward the bridge, and as one of the front cars was passing over the puzzle switch, it jumped the track, and the cars and cages in the rear dashed over it and collided with a freight train going in the opposite direction. A canvasman named James Squires was killed, and 2 others named Fuller and Isle were dangerously injured. The lion cage, this is where it gets good. The lion cage was shattered, and the lion and his consort leaped out onto the track and circled the wreck twice. And when the people fled, terror-stricken, the lions did likewise. They crawled under the wreck, leaving nothing to be seen but their tails. The tiger made a beeline for the baggage room and took refuge behind some trunks. The hyena dodged under a freight car and howled. The leopard ran around for a few minutes and knocked a couple of men over and then jumped back into his red cage. The lion tamer was the first man to the rescue. He grabbed the African monarch by the tail and dragged him out from under the wreck and tossed him into another cage. Then he seized the female consort by the tail and neck and led her into the cage. They both seemed grateful to him for the protection thus tendered them. They had never seen the jungle and were not bad animals. One fiery gentleman shot twice at the tiger in the baggage room, but the lion tamer took the frightened beast by the neck and led him into a boxcar. The hyena, meanwhile, had been stoned by some bad boys and was howling mournfully when rescued. A big boa constrictor was cut to pieces under the wheels of a car. 2 mountain lions were killed. The tiger was shot in 3 places, and the hyena lost half its tail. A pair of ibexes were killed, and a half a dozen monkeys are still at large. That's the end of that one. This is from the newspaper, from the St. Louis newspapers, the day that this happened. Here's some drawings of the people holding, wild animals running about, frantic efforts of an enormous crowd to escape from the fangs of lions and panthers. My favorite part, I think, is at very end when the ibexes, because the ibexes are killed, but before they're killed, they actually led the monkeys into a super hole. That's from the St. Louis paper. They don't capture that in the New York Times. The idea of these monkeys like scurrying off into the sewers, and I can't find any record of what happens to monkeys after that. So it would have been very easy to make this the unbelievable story and come up with a colony of monkeys that have been living underneath St. Louis. If anyone's heard of these monkeys and what happened to them, please let me know. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next unbelievable story. And we are going to go to another favorite, and that's Pearl Curran. So in 1913, Pearl Curran, that's the lovely lady there on the left, she's a St. Louis housewife. She has no interest in the occult, supposedly. She's not spiritualism is a big thing then, but she's not really into it. She plays the piano. She didn't really read much. In the papers, and as part of telling this story historically, Curran is painted as uneducated and very simple, but now historians can look and find that may not be the case. But her and her husband, they were not rich, they were very comfortable. She had a maid, they went to restaurants, they were fine, pretty social, and they had lots of friends and people that came and went from their house. Meanwhile, at one point though, her and her mother and a friend get out the Ouija board one afternoon, and they're like, let's play with this thing. And when they start playing, at first it's like gibberish, and then all of a sudden, a very clear message comes through to them on the Ouija board. And it says, "Many moons ago, I lived. Again, I come. Patience Worth is my name." It's spelled. So according to this Ouija board, there's a spirit named Patience Worth, and she had lived in Dorsetshire, England in 1649 or 1694. She keeps going back and forth. She speaks in a very archaic language. She uses words like thee and thou, all this stuff. And they try to find out more and more about her, and she shuts them down. And she's like, "You don't need to know anything about me. I just want to tell you some stuff." So Patience really comes through Pearl. Pearl is the one who's able to channel her. And eventually Pearl realizes she doesn't even need the board. She feels this pressure in her head, and Patience is there. And then they start writing together. So they start forming sentences, and Patience starts dictating stories and things to Pearl to start writing down. This lasted for over 25 years. Sometimes up to 2,000 words a day were dictated. And the works that were dictated to Pearl were not just personal messages, but creative writing. She passed along 5,000 poems, a play, short works of fiction, and several novels that were actually published to critical acclaim. It's one of the ones you're seeing there on the right. People came from all over to watch this. I mean, David Francis, one of the most famous St. Louisans of the time, he comes to their house. Then the last names of the families that came are very well-known, wealthy families that came to visit them. She never charged money. There was no theatrics. She just let people come in and watch this stuff happen. People came to investigate and never could find how she was doing this. Pearl explained that, again, it's the words flowed in her head. She felt the pressure, and then she could see scenes and images that would appear. She would see the details. And one of my most favorite parts of this is that if two characters were talking on a road, she would see the road and she could see the grass and perhaps the landscape. And if they were speaking a foreign language, she could hear them speaking and she could hear patients translating for her. So there's like some really crazy stuff, layers going on there. Sometimes she could see herself in the scenes, sometimes an onlooker, she's just watching, and she could, a lot of things in the details that were things that she would not have any way of knowing. So time passes, they do this for 25 years, all this stuff comes out, and then around 1922, the connection starts to fade between the two of them. There were changes in Pearl's life. She becomes pregnant at the age of 39, and her husband, her mother die, and that connection kind of fades with Pearl. And people weren't really that interested in it. No one could figure out how she was doing it, but it was kind of like an old story by that point. So Patience Worth she vanishes, and Pearl Curran moves to California to pursue a writing career of her own that is unsuccessful. And she dies pretty young. She dies at 54 in California. That is normally the end of the story, except recently I found out in researching, there's like a whole nother piece of this. It gets even more kind of bizarre beyond the writing. I'm gonna check the chat real quick. And that is this piece here. Patient Worth's Ouija board baby. And right, everything before this, totally unbelievable, but there's another twist. At some point, Patience apparently encouraged Pearl to adopt a baby and let it be her godmother, or let Patience be the baby's godmother. So in 1916, Patience Worth decided that Pearl and John Curran should adopt a baby. She should be the godmother. She encourages the Currans to find a baby in need, and the story went that a poor pregnant widow agreed to give up her infant. It is also thought that it was very convenient in that John Curran's daughter, who was 16, may have also been pregnant at the same time, and this may have been a cover-up. This baby was known as Ouija board baby and Patience Wee, and a photo of her in her bonnet and ruby cross. They published this in 1917. They dressed her like a little Puritan baby. Patience was told them that the baby had to be raised to be spinster prim, and be super serious. And one of the papers reports in 1917 that Patience Wee was given presents, including a shawl from the Orient, a French war orphan whose care was paid for 2 years in Patience Wee's name. Patience wrote verses for the baby, and said that no real flesh and blood mother could express more devoted sentiments to this baby. And then 6 months after John Curran dies in 1922, Pearl is pregnant. He's on his deathbed. She conceives. She gets pregnant. He's on his deathbed at age 39, and she has another baby, Eileen. And records show that Eileen was probably the daughter of a prominent lawyer, John Cashman. So Patience Wee and Eileen moved to California with Pearl, who would marry twice more after that. And interestingly, Pearl Curran, when she disconnects from Patience Worth, she also claims to be able to channel Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, are people that are in her mind. So yeah, eventually Eileen becomes the caretaker for Patience Wee, the Ouija board baby, who is now called Patty. And they were both alcoholics. Patty was found dead at age 27 after drinking sleeping pills, and Curran died in 37 at age 54. She was not wealthy. Despite all of this, she never made money off of any of it. Where she is buried in California is the tombstones with Pearl Curran and Patience Worth. All right, we're going to move on to our next topic. There's no questions. And at the end of this, I'm happy to answer, as any of you who've been to my talks know, I'm happy to answer any questions you have about this stuff. All right, our next one. If you are a St. Louisan of a certain age, you may totally know this story and it may not surprise you. I'm not from St. Louis, and this story just blew me away. This story is about two brothers who robbed the NBA for about $800 million, totally legally, and totally by accident. From 1976 to 2014, the most profitable ownership group in the entire NBA was based in St. Louis. The team that they had owned never played a single game, and the team's owners made hundreds of millions of dollars. It's pretty unbelievable. It starts in 1974 when St. Louis gets its own American Basketball Association franchise. And this is a competitor to the NBA. And the franchise was the Spirits of St. Louis. The team was owned by Ozzie and Daniel Silna. They were two brothers who had always wanted to own a basketball team. So the NBA will not take them on, and so they buy the Spirits in the ABA, in the lesser thing here. And the team was led by players named with great names like Marvin Bad News Barnes and Maurice the Enforcer Lucas. The Spirits quickly gained a reputation as one of the quirkiest and most entertaining teams in the entire ABA. But in 1976, the ABA starts to fail financially and it merges with the NBA. The leagues merge, 4 ABA teams become part of the NBA, and the others were offered a buyout of $3 million. So all the other owners take the deal, take the $3 million and run. But the Silnas, they do a counter offer. And instead of taking $3 million, the brothers offered to fold the team for about $2 million and a small share of the NBA's television rights in perpetuity. So the league's like, sure, why not? Less money. TV was not a big part of their revenue at the time, so it's not a big deal. And it's not, they think nothing of this. It turns out it's incredibly a big deal. Over the next few decades, because television rights become what really drives money and profit for the NBA, the Silnas, who don't actually even own a team, start to bring in those profits. And by the early 1990s, they were making over $4 million a year from the deal. By 2010, they were getting over $17 million a year. The league kept trying to buy them out, but they always hung on to it, which was smart. In 2014, the NBA finally just made a big offer, offered them $500 million, and they said yes and walked away from it. Just a crazy story. Here's some pictures of the teams here, and one of the brothers, Ozzie, he died in 2016, but the other brother is still alive. Okay, and our next one, I'm gonna go back. Just one image of some plants in a random place, but it's much bigger than. These plants are from one of the lesser known aspects of the wartime effort in St. Louis. I found this hiding in the St. Louis Public Library's digital collections, and they're part of the Waterworks photo collection, and I was like, what's this about? And then once I dug into it, I found some cool stuff. If you've ever been up to the Chain of Rocks Bridge, you're just north of what was at one time one of the largest and most modern of the St. Louis Water Department operations, the Baden Waterworks. And what is now mainly industrial space and older homes, it was not only home to the complex waterworks, which was pulling water in from the Mississippi and filtering it for residents, huge deal, but the water was being used to support large greenhouse facilities along the riverfront. Landscaping around the greenhouses was park-like, and in that collection I found at the library, you find lots of photos of Baden residents picnicking and relaxing. It's really gorgeous park setting that now is purely industrial space. What was hiding in the greenhouses was a large crop of rubber plants. And the rubber plants were being used by local war industry companies like Boeing, Monsanto, Mallinckrodt, people that are trying to do some secret stuff to create experimental materials to replace metals that were in short supply. And while none of these materials ever made it to the warfront, they continued to be grown and cultivated into the 1960s. And if you go onto this, like I said, the public library's website to find that digital collection, they have a fabulous collection of these waterworks photos, and these greenhouses are tucked in, hiding in along the collection. As of now, all evidence of the park, the waterworks, and the greenhouses are long gone. Okay, skip. You can tell I switched a slide there. All right, here's our next one. And I wanted to say thank you to Adam Clappy for sending me this way because I had no idea. All right, So in the early 20th century, St. Louis was home to one of the most sophisticated stadiums in the country. And it was not downtown, it was not in North St. Louis where a lot of the other sports facilities were. This was in South St. Louis. It was not built for football or baseball or any sport that we can go do today. And it was called a motordrome. That's what you're seeing there. It was built for a new sport at the time, a very popular sport known as board track racing. And what was that? Well, it's pretty insane. It's a form of motorcycle racing where competitors would race their bikes on short wooden tracks that had been built at such a steep angle they were almost sideways. The end effect was that the tracks were shaped like bowls and the racers are going out around at impossible speeds. So the sport starts in LA in 1909, and by 1912, St. Louisans were in on this. And they built a motordrome at a small amusement park called Priesters Park, which is the corner of Grand and Merrimack. And I'm going to take you there in just a second to show you where that is. The track of the motordrome was 1/4 mile long, and the track banked at 62 degrees, leading officials in St. Louis to brag that it was the steepest and therefore the fastest motordrome in the country. There's an image of this. And here's people, riding. This is from the St. Louis Motordrome. Here's guys racing on it. So the speeds could lead to incredibly, obviously devastating wrecks, and people are not, wearing helmets that we're wearing now, things like that. So sports riders took to calling motordromes murderdromes because of the dangers that it posed, not just to the riders, but to the spectators, because you would have, a crash happen with a rider that would then send pieces into the spectators. The day that our motordrome opened, which was August 31st, 1912, there were 15,000 people there packed into the seats to watch a few of the races. Early on in the evening, though, there is a tragedy when a local racer named Cleve Stillwell got into a wreck while speeding around the steep track. He was going 80 miles an hour. He was instantly killed. And according to the St. Louis Star and Times, Stillwell's head was almost severed and bones in his body were crushed as he plunged 30 feet to the ground from the steep incline. Pieces of his motorcycle broke off and flew into the stands, but luckily no one was injured. In the aftermath of the accident, the motordrome was enveloped in chaos. So hundreds of spectators are rushing the field to try to help him, which ends up blocking the way for the emergency workers that were going there to help him. Other people are beelining for the exits. It creates incredible confusion. Thousands of people streaming in the streets. So then the city officials don't say, hey, this is too dangerous of a sport, let's not do this. They say, let's change this track. And so they add different exits and update that. So it's shut down for a short time, then it opens back up. But then they're able to say, not only is our motordrome the most steepest and the fastest, it is the safest. And there were several more injuries over the years, but it was definitely safer because of these things. It was not a very popular sport for very long. By the end of the 19-teens, most tracks had been abandoned. And then it became more of a stunt performance sport versus people racing. By the mid-1920s, the St. Louis Motordrome was gone and its track became stuff of memory. So I'm going to show you where this is. If you were to go there now, there's a great landmark on this exact spot. So there's at Grand and Merrimack. So here we are here. Kind of in Bevo. So here's Merrimack, that's Grand, and there's the Feasting Fox restaurant, which I believe is closed now, but a very well-known landmark in South St. Louis that used to be the scene of this big motordrome and an amusement park that was there. All right, our next stop is Nellie Munch. And this story includes kidnapping, a fake baby, and Rush Limbaugh, all in one. This story takes place in the 1930s, and it's a sensational story. It must have given people a nice break from Great Depression, and news and crime and all that kind of stuff, although it is a crime. It is a story of Nellie Tipton Munch, and she was a well-known St. Louis socialite. She was married to a prominent physician. She's always at all the high society events. They are very well-known people in St. Louis. She runs a dress shop downtown. In the Central West End, and she's a designer. But it was rumored that her shop was in financial trouble, and she did at one point. She did have to, she was in danger of having to declare bankruptcy on the shop. And she comes from a long line of interesting characters. Like her father was a Confederate Civil War figure who was pretty brutal and like ripped up railroad tracks and did all this kind of stuff. And different, like her brother is incredibly wealthy. Like she has a lot of different characters in her family, but this is Nellie's story. So the story begins with a kidnapping, not of her. It starts in 1931 when a local doctor, Isaac D. Kelly, he's kidnapped. So he makes a house call. Someone calls him and says, I need your help. In Clayton, he goes to the house. 8 days later, he's released. And when he's released, it's because the people that are holding him as a kidnapping, the people who had kidnapped him, they call the Post-Dispatch and have the Post-Dispatch come. And he goes home with the reporter. So the reporter gets the full story on this like immediately. So they don't know who did it though. Like they keep it anonymous as to who had done the kidnapping. 3 years later, there's a tavern owner named Adolf Fiedler who gives the story. He like spills the beans, and he claims the kidnapping was the work of ex-cons, gangsters, and a woman that he called Mrs. N. She was later identified as auburn-haired beauty and Nellie Munch, and a resident of Westminster Place, and a prominent member of St. Louis society. So someone who was way up there, in life. She's the daughter of the Reverend William Tipton. She was sister to Judge Ernest Tipton. She was the wife of Dr. Ludwig Munch, and she was a manager, like I said, of a boutique called the Mitzi Shop. She had a habit. When she was young, she was arrested for jewelry, suspected of jewelry thievery. And she also, as a business owner, had a habit of sending bills to widows for lingerie that their late husbands may have or probably hadn't purchased from her shop, which is kind of an odd thing to be doing as a grift. So she has, again, jewelry theft. She was known as fraternizing with gangsters, but she had enough money that kind of kept her free of trouble for quite a while. But then this kidnapping happens, and then she is named as a suspect. It's Dr. Kelly there in the middle. Disguised in goggles by kidnappers, a little bit. So she's charged with the doctor's kidnapping. They move her trial to Mexico, Missouri, which is out near Columbia, Missouri, where her father had his church, and they moved it out there. Also, her brother was in the Missouri Supreme Court, so they move it out there because they think that people are going to have less of a bias out there, and they wouldn't convict her. She believes that the jury will not convict her if she's a new mother, and so she concocts a plan to get a baby to claim as her own. She pretends that she's pregnant, and her attorney helps her locate a baby in Chicago, purchase the baby, and bring it to St. Louis. That baby died, and she found a second child, the son of Anna Ware, who was an unwed domestic servant in Pennsylvania who had come to St. Louis to deliver her child. The plan worked, and she was acquitted of the kidnapping. At the same time, Nellie Munch, she gets acquitted, but she doesn't stop. So at the same time, she blackmails one of her husband's colleagues, Dr. Marsh Pitzman, claiming the baby was his. And so when Ware goes to court to get the child back, Pitzman, who had been Munch's lover, gives her $16,000 for her defense. So that's quite a story. And Nellie Munch, she's sentenced in 1936 to 10 years for mail fraud for the blackmailing of Pitzman. Her husband was sentenced to 8 years, and her accomplices received 10 and 5 years. So the image is there. On the left, there's the headlines about the kidnapping. On the right, there are people lined up in Mexico, Missouri to see her. as she's leaving the courthouse. So that went quickly, and that's just a handful of ridiculous, amazing stories that I found. I would love if you would like to put in the Q&A or the chat your ideas for which one was fake. We'll see how good of a liar I am. And you can also just ask random questions too if you want to do that.
This is always the part where we get to sing and dance.
Right? You can do the Tammy and Amanda show. Oh, we have someone has put their, ooh. Justin has said it's the Motordrome. Jessica's saying the kidnapping story. And I'm going to wait for anybody else to throw it out there before I say what is the truth. Tammy, do you have an idea?
Gosh, I don't. They're all pretty fascinating. I can't tell. I mean, they're all so crazy. They all have elements of not being true.
NBA story. I like that. I like that all of them are being suspected. Like this is what I.
I think I'm with Jessica.
The horse on the pulley. I think the horse on the pulley is like my patron saint, like of my virtual tours. Horse on the pulley. Or the guy pulling the horse. All right. Nobody else is gonna guess. It's time. Give me a drum roll. The fake. Oh, somebody else has said horse. Nope. So they are all true except for the rubber plants. The rubber plants making experimental materials for the war effort is a total lie. Total lie. However, there were greenhouses in Baden that were connected to the waterworks, and there are lots of pictures in the St. Louis Public Library's collection of these gorgeous greenhouses and parks that were right there along the riverfront. And yeah, Justin, as far as like when that Freestone Fox building was built in 1913, the hippodrome is, or the Motordrome is across the street and back behind, and there are several great articles online that show exactly where that was sitting in the neighborhood.
I love that.
All right, I could do 10 more of these ridiculous stories. I think, and my favorite of these to tell was the Patience Worth story, because I've been telling Patience story for a while. It's part of our Central West End tour, but I did not know until very recently about the Patience Worth baby, about the Ouija board baby, which is like my new online name, I think, is Ouija board baby. It's just so ridiculous.
What's so much fun about this is you've taken like stories that we've all heard bits and pieces about, but then you've taken it in just a bizarre direction that is really fun and like, yeah, it's just like, huh?
Yeah. And like I said, Adam and Andrew, they delivered. I asked them for just a few ideas and they were like, here's a bunch of stuff. So yeah, they were amazing.
Last call on questions. Come on, this is your opportunity to ask anything of Amanda. Almost,
yeah. And I can tell you the stories that didn't make the list that almost did. One was the first time women were recorded as rowing on the Mississippi River. And it turned out it was two men in women's clothing that joined the regatta and raced as women, but the entire time acting like they were fainting and that they couldn't row. It was a pretty ridiculous story. I couldn't even do it. I tried. It was no, I wasn't gonna give them some time. All right. Well, that was a fun way to spend a Thursday evening.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, some of these stories I knew a little bit about, but most of them I had no idea. So very fun, great little tidbits that you can all take and tell your friends.
Yeah, this will be on YouTube, so you can you can trick people on it if you want to. And yeah, and want to invite everybody on the tours. We're because they're like this, except everything's true.
Yeah,
Most
so we have walking tours. There's even some virtual tours that you can book as just like this that we're doing, but they're much longer and more interactive. Or we have ways that you can make them private. So if you have friends and family that you want to have a really fun and interesting evening situated around one of these really cool topics, we can make that happen. Oh, she's scary. Make her go away.
I know. And one more thing before we go is I want to beg everybody to please fill out the feedback. I live for that. That feedback is so helpful and so useful. So please, if you have a moment to let me know how this was for you, I really appreciate it.
And if you
even
can
if you
show
say
us,
it stinks, it's fine.
Yeah. Yes, honesty is important, but I don't know if we'll get that. I mean, honesty we'll get. I don't think we'll get that it stinks. If you could show the last slide, just to give everybody an indication of what's coming up. There's all sorts of fun talks coming. Interesting. Oh, got Johnny Rabbit next on Tuesday, April 6th. And an interactive painting party that I think it's a buy one, get one free now. So really great deal, fun, interactive way to spend an evening. The Chow and Chat. So all sorts of great things coming up every Tuesday and some Thursdays, and it looks like Wednesday afternoon. So just oodles of great virtual activities, and very soon, hopefully this summer, we'll see you all in person at the History Museum.
And
Thank you. Yes. Oh, that's right. Our bus tours will, fingers crossed, start in June. So.
All right, so please fill out those things and I'll say bye.
Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.